One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy krausen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brewlosophy podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. There are a ton of killer things about being a brewer, digging your fingers into recipe design, playing with all of the sciencey stuff that makes up the brewing process, then eventually enjoying the fruits of our labor. Now, as great as all of this stuff is on its own, I think most people would agree that a big part of what makes brewing so fun is sharing what we've created with others. Of course, it's during these times that people tend to offer their feedback, whether sought or not. You're listening to the Brewlosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this week we're bringing you another Brews Views episode, the topic of choice being one many hold strong opinions about. Joining me to discuss our unabashed thoughts on beer evaluation and judging is contributor Cade Jobe.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one again. This is something I love to talk about, evaluating beers and judging. I've done a decent amount of it myself. I'm excited to hear your thoughts, Marshall, and hopefully we don't piss too many people off, but I would imagine some of the things we're going to talk about today are pretty controversial.
Well, at the very least, I think some people have strong opinions about some of the issues that we're going to hit on here. If there is an aspect of brewing that tickles the psychological part of my mind the most, it has to be the evaluative part of it. I'm personally convinced that brewing and even just drinking beer cannot be separated from some form of evaluation. With one comes the other, no matter how you spin it. Now, given how long I've been brewing and drinking beer, as well as the fact that I kind of tend to overthink everything, I've developed some ideas that again, I think people might find kind of interesting. We don't intend to hurt anybody's feelings, but the whole point of this series is to share our thoughts in as uncensored a way as possible. And because of that, we just want to remind everybody that we may use language that maybe you're sensitive to. Again, we just want to be honest and uncensored and whatnot. We're not going to intentionally, be vulgar. We'll put it that way. But it is going to be an interesting one, and we look forward to the feedback on this show as well. Real quick, if you enjoy this show and would like to make sure it sticks around, please consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy, where in return for making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with someone in the brewing world. Coming up is sour beer guru and host of the Sour Hour podcast on the Brewing Network, Jay Goodwin from the Rare Barrel out of Berkeley, California. If you've ever listened to the Sour Hour or tasted his beers, you know how good this session is going to be. And if you want in, you got to make sure to become a patron by March 27th, 2020. Past guests have included folks like John Palmer, Russian Rivers, Vinny Chilurzo, Grandmaster BJCP Judge Gordon Strong, and so many more. And all of those sessions are available on our private Facebook page for patrons to watch whenever they like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and a review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we would really appreciate it. Feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers gorgeous stainless gear such as the turnkey BH15 Pilot Brewing System, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brewing process. Brewers Hardware has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see it for yourself at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy when you're checking out to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Trevor Ellis from Kansas City had some feedback on our dual-part series on bias way back, episodes 63 and 64. He said, I wanted to share a story that highlighted this bias thing for me. I was headed home from a wedding that allowed me to make a pit stop in Des Moines at my favorite bar, El Bait Shop. I'd been there 2 years prior and drank Pseudo Sue, that's a beer from Toppling Goliath, for the first time. They had it on tap, and I told the bartender that's what I wanted unless he could talk me out of it. He poured me 3 samples and didn't tell me what they were. I remember telling him that sample 1 was good, I didn't really care for sample 2, and sample 3 was my favorite. Guess which one was Pseudo Sue? Sample 2. I equate loving it for the first time to having a great experience in my environment and trying this highly hyped beer for the first time. By the way, the beer I absolutely loved, Sample 3, was Neon by Barntown Brewing out of West Des Moines. Interesting experience. I think that we can all sort of relate with a bit.
Yeah, and apropos for today's topic,
oh yeah,
about evaluating and judging beer. I wonder why you picked this feedback, Marshall. Yeah, totally. I've had that experience myself, and I hope to have it again many times in the future. I feel like things like that are really good for at least me. I enjoy being challenged whenever I have a blind spot or a bias about something. So yeah, that's really interesting feedback. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about those things today.
Oh, I'm sure we'll get into it. I have 100% had this experience. And it kind of the way that it happened to me, I remember I was just hanging out with some friends and a buddy was, when you're doing beer shares, sometimes you're just kind of pouring stuff, drinking it, talking to your friends. And that's exactly what happened. And I forget exactly what super hyped beer it was, but nobody commented on it. And the guy who opened the bottle was like, you guys realize what you're drinking, right? And none, and of course, once it kind of tipped over in our minds, like, oh my God, this is that beer that's so hard to get that everybody talks about. Then of course it becomes amazing. And I just think that's kind of funny, but bias, man, I'm telling you, this evaluation thing and the way we approach, tasting and experiencing beer and other foods, of course, it's just so influenced by expectation and other things. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. That actually raises a quick story for me too. I had an experience, this was probably 10 or 12 years ago at this point, where we were sitting around at a bar in Dallas and talking about, I can't remember. We were drinking like Coors Light or Bud Light. And one person sitting at the table was saying, oh, I will only drink Bud Light. I won't drink Miller Lite or Coors Light, because Miller Lite and Coors Light have this whatever flavor that it was that we were talking about. And I said, well, I only drink Coors Light. I don't drink Bud Light or Miller Lite. And so we asked the waitress, said, hey, could you just pour like each of the three, like American Light lagers, Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, could you just pour them into 3 different glasses and mark them so that you know which ones we are? And let's see if we can actually say which one is which. I was sitting there with a group of 7 people and only one person was actually able to do that, which I'm pretty sure he got lucky. I don't think he actually was able to taste the difference, but we couldn't or categorize them just by what we thought our biases were or what we thought it was supposed to taste like, which I thought was fascinating. Now they were different.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I love that. Fascinating feedback, Trevor. I'm glad you shared that story with us. If you have something you'd like to share with us, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. All right. Kolsch is one of my favorite styles. Crisp, clean, easy drinking. I've certainly brewed my fair share. Cade, I know that you're a lover as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so delicious. Well, listener Kenny Hyman, a.k.a. the Brewer of Seville, recently sent me a bottle of what he calls a traditional German Kolsch that he said was made with 93% Pilsner malt, 7% Munich Light, pretty typical Kolsch grist, and then hit with 1.5 ounces of Hallertauer at 60 minutes in the kettle, and then fermented with imperial yeast GO3 Dieter.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Pour it in a glass to be like a Miller Lite.
It does not smell like a Miller Lite.
You don't smell like a Miller Lite.
Thank you.
Oh,
Good God.
that's smoky.
Smoky AF.
That's dark, cloudy smoke.
Yeah.
That's like smoked brisket smoke.
That's weird.
Smoke them if you got them smoke. Wow, that's like liquid smoke. Am I wrong?
I don't know what it is.
Think harder, man. We only got a minute.
It's weird.
It's smoky.
I don't like it.
But it's light and it's easy, right? So even though the taste isn't right to our liking, at least it's not atom bomb of taste not to our liking. It's just a little bit.
I've had worse.
It's a hand grenade of not liking.
It's weird though.
I would not drink this. If someone handed me this to me in a party, I'd be like, oh, that's interesting, very smoky. And then I do that thing where I put it down, but then it was like, hey, what about over there? And get everybody distracted. Yeah. And
Toss it under the table real quick, over the shoulder.
I don't know, man. It's too much. But I mean, it's not terrible. I hate this, but I don't like it.
Yeah, it's not mine either. Not my favorite. I'm just going to give it a 1.
I'll give it a 1 too. That's actually 11 Jersey tips. It's a respectable score.
Smoky, weird. To be honest, that's pretty spot on with my impressions of the beer as well. Pouring this Kolsch, I had high expectations. It was absolutely gorgeous, crystal clear, perfect color. But there was this kind of burnt rubbery thing going on in both the aroma and the flavor, something I associate with phenolic phenolics. Makes me wonder if perhaps something didn't happen or something went wrong during the shipping process. I also wrote a note that underneath that spicy kind of phenolic thing, I could tell that the beer was quite good, but that smoky, spicy flavor, the rubbery thing, just kind of stole the show and ruined the experience of the beer overall. Now, Kenny did make a note. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Cade, that he pitched a pouch of Dieter. I'm assuming that it was either not stored well at first or somehow maybe old, but that the fermentation didn't take off for like 4 days. So he pitched another pouch. The only time I've ever made a beer that had that kind of icky, rubbery thing, this is basically what happened to me as well. I pitched basically dead yeast. So I don't know if maybe that's the issue, but
well, yeah. I mean, when you said rubber, burnt rubber from your flavor or that you tasted, the traditional, I guess, off flavor is yeast autolysis, dead yeast cells, yeast that are eating themselves. So yeah, I mean, that could totally be. That could also just happen in the bottle too.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's weird.
I'm sort of bummed because, there's sometimes people send us stuff that is just really weird. And so I'm not bummed out if I don't like it. But Kolsch, that's a very clean, crisp beer. I have a feeling that when Kenny sent it in, it probably tasted pretty good. Which leads me to believe that perhaps something happened during the shipping. I mean, we're not controlling the temperature levels when it's, packed in a box and sent to my house from UPS. So anyways, Kenny, I appreciate you sending me the beer. Again, I could tell that it was probably really good if that phenolic thing wasn't there. So I want to try your Kolsch again. If you make one that doesn't have that, please send it in. All right, if you have a beer or any other fermented beverage that you would like to have reviewed by Jersey and Tim, email me, marshall@brulosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, when we come back from this short break, our unfiltered thoughts on evaluation and judging.
Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brulosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. This episode is brought to you by Milwaukee-based Spike Brewing, designer and manufacturer of premium quality homebrewing equipment. Whether you're interested in upgrading to a stainless steel fermenter like the incredible Flex Plus or switching to a turnkey electric setup so you can brew inside and avoid the cold, wet winter, Spike Brewing has the solution for you. Visit spikebrewing.com/brulosophy today and let their team help you figure out what you need to make the most of your brew day. Again, that's spikebrewing.com/brulosophy. Spike Brewing. Pursue what's possible. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. My first batch of beer ever, an Irish red ale made from extract with steeping grains, was ready to drink in February of 2003. Well, after sharing the first bottle with a co-brewer, my friend Nathan, who was my roommate at the time, and realizing it wasn't an absolute disaster, all I could think about was sharing it with other beer-loving friends. In the beginning, the typical response went something like, "Holy shit, you actually made this beer. Wow, it's not going to kill me." The fact that I could respond to the affirmative motivated me to want to brew more. As I continued down that path, I made new friends who were far more educated on beer things. They knew the language of beer evaluation, and they weren't afraid to use it.
Cade, I have a feeling, though maybe I'm wrong, that this is something that you and perhaps many of our listeners can relate to.
Oh, I think anybody that has brewed a home brew, unless you're just, doing it entirely for your own personal consumption, has shared their beer with other people and looked expectantly. Did you like it? What'd you think? Does it taste like crap? Are you going to drink it?
Yeah.
I think everybody has experienced that. And it's one of the things that I love the most about brewing. I love sharing my beer with people. I brew, especially if we're brewing Brewlosophy batches, I'm brewing 10 gallons a batch, and I'm not going to drink 10 gallons of beer by myself in any reasonable sort of time span, before the beer goes bad.
Yeah.
Even me and my wife, she likes beer too, so we'll go through some beer, but we're not going to polish off that many without some help.
I feel like I said it earlier, but you can't separate brewing from evaluation. I mean, they go hand in hand. In this show, just a little disclaimer, we are going to be digging into very specific components of the evaluation and judging thing. It's not necessarily that we're sitting here saying that people shouldn't evaluate or judge. We're just going to talk about some of our thoughts on the more finer aspects of it. Now, just to kind of clarify, the way I think about things, I sort of separate evaluation from judging. They're a little bit different. To me, evaluation involves assessing characteristics and qualities of a beer, usually independent of other beers, though it can be relative to a specific style. The kind of stuff you're doing when you're hanging out at a homebrew club meeting and you got a table full of beers people brewed, you're kind of evaluating them on their own, independent of other things, right? Standard bottle shares, very typical evaluative experience. Judging, on the other hand, involves assigning a score to a beer based on a set standard or guideline. I know that some people might use those terms interchangeably. I'll only clarify that because for this episode, that's kind of how we're going to be referring to those terms. So judging, obviously, that's like if you're submitting a beer for competition or whatever. To summarize, judging always includes evaluation, but evaluation doesn't necessarily include judging unless you're the type of person who just likes to, give a score to every beer, which is odd. That's what I mean when I'm using those terms for this episode.
Yeah, I like that distinction. I think that's kind of an important one. Although I would say evaluation is the process that is used during judging, right? So like you can evaluate beers differently, but ultimately evaluation is the process. Right. And I think like we might want to spend a little bit of time talking about like how I evaluate beers. Sure. This is something that I think everybody does sort of uniquely. Everybody has their own way that they do it, although I'm not going to say there are general guidelines out there, but there's general things that people do, to evaluate the beer. I mean, obviously you're going to look for aroma, appearance, flavor, mouthfeel. And I like to, this may be a little bit controversial, but I actually like to follow the process of like a BJCP score sheet. I like to follow that process. And even when I'm just, at a bar, of drinking a beer for the first time. Obviously I'm not like writing down a number on the commercial value, but I think that there's merit in actually thinking critically about beer.
I don't disagree with you. In fact, I completely agree with you. And in particular, thinking about beer with the intention of, especially if you're a brewer, perhaps improving, your end product. One of the issues that I take when it comes to the evaluation and judging piece is this concept of unbiased feedback. How many times have you heard, well, you should enter your beer in a competition, or you should take it to, the group of 3 judges, at your homebrew club meeting and have them, evaluate your beer in an unbiased way. Again, I get what people mean by that. I think when people are thinking the term unbiased, they're kind of keeping it simple and saying, well, they don't necessarily have, they didn't have a role in brewing the beer. It's not going to hurt them if they are negative or overly positive or anything like that. But the truth of the matter is, we are all biased all the time. And so you're not getting unbiased feedback. People can say, oh, I'm going to hang up my preferences. You can't do that. You can try, but I'm telling you, whether it's beer evaluation or life in general, we are a product. We operate on our very, very deep seated internal biases all the time. And so you can't separate yourself from that, which opens up a whole other kind of, again, my way of thinking about it, kind of this whole other world of, well, then how are these evaluations in any way objective? And I do think there are objective things. You can look at a beer and you can say, oh, that's got a nice yellow color to it. Okay, cool. We can all agree on that. When I taste it and I say, oh man, I'm picking up such and such and such and such, how do we know that that's exactly what it is, for one? And two, how do we determine if that's good or bad, right? We know certain things, like maybe a phenolic off flavor in a Kolsch or something shouldn't be there. But that, in my mind, again, you're kind of like, well, if you go past a certain point, I guess, sure, we can all agree. But it's just, it gets me so confused. It's probably one of the reasons I no longer compete, is because I kind of lost faith in that piece of the process.
Oh man, so much to unpack there in that comment. But yeah, I there were a couple of things. I'm going to try to rattle them off real quick, and hopefully we can come back to them. But one of the things you said is unbiased feedback, and you said it kind of doesn't feel like people are bringing their biases to the table. And my response to that, it would be, but as compared to your mom drinking your beer. I mean, mom's not going to say that you have shitty beer. So maybe some people's moms will, but or your spouse or your best friend or somebody that loves you and cares about you isn't going to give you like actually I taste a phenolic off flavor in that beer, or I taste some medicine in that beer. They're just going to look at it and go, yeah, I'll drink it or I won't drink it most of the time. Now, unless you've got, beer friends who you can take that kind of stuff to. But I think it's useful to get at least attempted unbiased feedback, right? Like attemptively objective feedback. So point number one on that, and I guess actually we could start there, but so we don't forget the other two I was thinking about was, okay, you're writing down, your results while you're judging. You're writing down what you taste, and what you taste isn't necessarily what the person who you're partnering with will taste, or that if you're just sitting in a bar drinking a beer, that it's going to taste the same as the person sitting next to you. Yeah. We're all individuals. So we have our own individuality. Point number two. Point number three is actually communicating what we are tasting, right? How many times have you gone like, or have you tasted a beer and said, it's estery, and it's like, well, what the hell does that mean? What does estery mean? What kind of ester is it? Or what does that word even mean?
Well, that actually brings me to another point that I want to make, which is, I really hope I don't hurt feelings out there, but I feel like, and this has to be the case in other hobbies as well, but I feel like among brewers, there is this tendency to be very prideful in one's evaluation abilities. We have all been around those people who immediately upon, sipping or smelling a new beer that somebody handed them, wants to be the first one to point out that they noticed diacetyl or DMS or acetaldehyde or esters or whatever it might be. And it's like you can't give this dimwit a freaking beer without them thinking that they smell or taste something bad. And again, that's one of those things, probably the most aggravating thing to me about like beer shares and whatnot is that person or that group of people who it's like they feel so cool being the one to point out that there's something wrong in this beer. And you'll have another group of people who just aren't as arrogant, I suppose, who don't pick that stuff up at all and probably have higher credentials when it comes to beer evaluation. Perhaps they're a judge or cicerone, who don't pick that up at all, but this person is just hung up on it, and go figure, ends up happening in every beer you serve them. And it's that kind of stuff. I feel like this is not me, I'm not brushing too broad but I'm also not saying specific. I feel like there is this need, this desire, this want to look smart around our peers, to look like we know what the hell we're talking about. And that, yet again, is another influence in the way that evaluation is going to occur. And I will say, that doesn't just happen at, informal beer shares. I have sat at judging tables in a pair with people, with another person where it's the same exact thing. They want to be the first one to write down that they picked up some off flavor that I'm not picking up most of the time. Or, if I pick it up, then we disagree on what it is. And like, it's so difficult to, I think, because it's such a subjective thing, right? When you're tasting something and then you've got all of these things like preference and whatnot coming into play, it can be really difficult to actually identify these things that a lot of us have never even actually tasted in real life.
Ooh, there you hit the nail on the head there at the end. I think a lot of people haven't necessarily tasted some of the things. I mean, maybe most people have tasted diacetyl. The buttery, butterscotch, butter popcorn.
I don't know, dude. I think a lot of people have tasted caramel malt, and then they read that diacetyl tastes like butter, and then they mix the two up. We've done testing for stuff like that in various forms, and the more we do that, the more I'm convinced that a lot of people are mistaking flavors for off flavors.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. Caramel malt and diacetyl. Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. The other one for me, and this is me personally, because I have no fucking clue what this actually tastes like. Corny. Okay.
Dude,
I don't know what corny tastes like. I've tried cream corn. I've tried corn on the cob, and I've tried to find it in beer, and I have no fucking clue what corny tastes like.
Well, so you're talking about dimethyl sulfide, DMS, one of the two popular.
Oh yeah, of course.
Every homebrewer learns about DMS, and then they taste it in every beer. I will tell you this right now. This is what I'm saying. DMS, in my experience, I've had two different flavor standards now, meaning actual dimethyl sulfide in powder and liquid form added to beer does not taste like corn to me. Now, maybe it does to other people. I will admit, again, subjective. To me, it tastes or smells more so like ketchup. It's got this like old tomato character to it that does not come across as corn to me at all. But you know what does kind of have a corny flavor? Pale malt. It tastes like corn. If you make a beer, if you make a blonde ale and you don't throw a lot of hops at it and you have a really nice pale malt flavor, it has sort of an earthy, I guess you could interpret it as kind of a corn-like flavor. That is not DMS. That is malt flavor. And I feel like that's another one that people mix up all the time. If I had a nickel for every time sitting at a judging table or an evaluation round, somebody has pointed out DMS and I taste it and go, dude, I've had real DMS. I don't want to be this guy. I'm pretty sure you're just tasting malt. I think that's all you're tasting.
Yeah, totally. I mean, how many times on the light lager table have I been judging and somebody goes, oh yeah, this is corny, I'm going to check DMS. I get the same thing for you. And that's not to say that DMS doesn't taste like corny to some people. Right, it could absolutely. But DMS for me is that canned tomato paste. Like exactly. That's what it's like, tomato paste. That's what I get. I've had flavor standards. I've done a bunch of off tastings. Not a bunch. I've done probably, I don't know, a half dozen off flavor tastings, going through all the different ones: diacetyl, DMS, skunky, all of those different flavors, oxidized, everything. So I also did it for my Cicerone exam, which we'll talk about in a little bit later.
Yeah,
what I did to do for that. But that two things there, I would say. One is people's taste receptors are actually different, right? My taste receptors are different than my wife. And I'll give you a great example. I'll give you two examples. Marshall, do you like mushrooms?
I love mushrooms.
Oh, dude, I love them too. I absolutely love mushrooms. My wife can't stand them. She says they smell like stinky feet and she doesn't want stinky feet in her food, And I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. To me, that's a subjective sort of difference between us. She just doesn't like mushrooms. Yeah. I love mushrooms, so that's just a difference. But cilantro, okay?
Right.
I love cilantro. Whenever she tastes cilantro, she gets that the soap taste.
My sister's the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like even at small parts, like even if we're just cutting up some arugula, which is, my understanding, it's the same plant as cilantro. Even if we're cutting up some arugula and there's like a little tiny piece of cilantro that gets put into a salad, she can taste it, and it's a super low threshold for her.
Yeah,
there's actually some science behind that says that some people, it is actually a different perception.
Right.
So, all of this, we kind of started this by saying, I have no idea what corny is, or we disagree. You and I disagree about that descriptor for DMS.
Yeah.
But again, here's another point that I want to make about evaluation. It doesn't mean you're wrong if you taste corn.
I couldn't agree more with you. Those examples that you gave are so beautiful. Such a perfect way to exemplify some of the ways that the reasons why I sort of question the objectivity of beer, cider, meat evaluation, whatever, among other evaluations. One of the arguments that I've heard from somebody when I posed that, the examples that you gave, the cilantro thing, to be specific, And I think it's a valid argument. The person said, well, but if that person knows that cilantro tastes like soap to them, then they evaluate relative to knowing that cilantro or expecting that cilantro is going to taste like soap. So they kind of build this construct to which they are now putting, the beer, we'll say the style of beer. So for example, I'm not a big fan of Hefeweizen. I actually would never, unless somebody is begging me to brew one for an event or something, I would never brew one willingly on my own. I just don't drink it. Does that mean I can't judge Hefeweizen because I don't like it? Or can I still, I'm going to use this term loosely, but evaluate it from an unbiased perspective as somebody who understands what it's supposed to taste like and knows what those characteristics are?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, because I am not I'm not a fan of super hoppy, super bitter beers. I'm just not a fan of them. I like them. I'll drink them. I've ordered them before at restaurants. I've had them. I've judged, super hoppy categories, but it's not my favorite.
Right.
Does that mean I can't, as a judge, look at a hoppy beer and say, okay, yeah, as compared to the other beers that are here, this is what I taste or this is what I want? I think the answer to that is yes and no. I mean, I think, like you said at the top of the show, I can't get rid of my bias, and maybe one of the reasons why I don't like necessarily the bitterness of hoppy beers is because I'm more sensitive to it, or there's something in my taste receptors that are unique to me, or at least different than other people who like hoppy beers.
Right.
But I can still objectively try to put aside whatever biases I have, taste the beer that's in front of me, and then rate it as compared to other hoppy beers that I've had.
Yeah.
So
I agree. And I do think, again, I'm not saying that, people should, like the solipsistic argument of there's no such thing as a proper evaluation and I evaluate beer. I enjoy doing it. I feel like if we go into it with maybe a dose of humility and some understanding of how we're being influenced by external factors, then I feel like our evaluation skills actually improve by doing that, which is another argument for why what's good about evaluation is that it helps us as the evaluator to improve our own skills. And then also, what about like the whole influence of knowing who actually brewed the beer? How many times has your local competition winner brought a beer to a club meeting or something, and everybody's just pining to get it and they love it and it's amazing, and then somebody who's maybe kind of known for not brewing so well, but they're improving and they bring a beer and it just gets ripped to shreds regardless of how good it is. I have had that very experience. In fact, I was at a club meeting and I grabbed an open bottle off of a table brewed by one such dude, good guy, and shared it with some friends. I don't know if they thought I brewed it or not, but it was pretty well received. And then the same dude comes over later on, 20 minutes later, and is serving the same exact beer, but he's the one serving it. And, the guys I was hanging out with didn't know that it was the same beer I'd shared with them earlier. And again, the responses were generally more negative. It was more critical, I should say. It's just a fascinating phenomenon to me.
Oh man, that's such a good example of that whole topic. Like, how much are we actually adjusting our impressions of flavor based on what we know about the brewer who's doing it? That's an amazing that might be a Brews Views topic just all by itself. But man, yeah, and I will say I'm guilty of that too. There's a couple of people that I know that consistently make good beer. So at the Homebrew Shares, I'm always trying to try whatever they've got to bring and share, and that's not to say that the other people are making bad beer or anything. It just means that those people generally make decent or good beer. And so I'm always interested in trying it.
And that influences your expectations. And we know that expectation plays a huge role in how we experience things perceptibly. I love that you brought up looking for the person who you trust makes good beer. There was a guy, local dude who doesn't brew anymore, but he was just known for kicking ass in competitions. And so, we'll talk a little bit about competitions here in a bit, but the guy was just a solid brewer. But because of that, every beer he made was lauded. Everybody loved it. There was never like no one. I felt like nobody would look at his beers critically, which fine. I don't care, but nobody gave a critical eye to his beers because you just accepted that he brews well. I feel like the same thing goes for commercial breweries. If somebody shows up with any bottle of beer that says Russian River on it or The Alchemist, I promise
what I was thinking.
Nobody's going to talk shit on it, because you expect it to be good, so you don't really pay this again. I'm just shooting from the hip here. But you don't expect a beer from Russian River to be bad, so you kind of close off that portion of your mind when you're evaluating it. I feel that happens a lot more than it doesn't.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the Russian River is a great example because Pliny the Elder and Pliny the Younger.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody. I've still never had Pliny the Elder because I've never been able to find it here in Texas. And the times that I've been out into California, I just either haven't had time to stop by and get it. I've never been to Russian River or even that part of California, so I'm gonna have to try it at some point. But everybody always talks about that as being this amazing IPA, and I'm sure it is. Like, don't get me wrong, but I do wonder how much of it, especially let's take Pliny the Younger, which is only available on site for a short amount of time once a year.
Yeah.
How much is that influencing how much people like that beer? Having never tried them, I don't have an opinion on it. It's just something that I think is curious or that I'm interested in finding out someday.
Yeah. And I think that's a good, that's a perfect example, Pliny the Younger, because this is a thing, you've literally got people lining up over a mile long outside of Russian River in Santa Rosa, California. I happened to be in Santa Rosa, I believe it was 2012, for the Younger release. I did not go for the Younger release, and so I skipped out. We were driving by to stop for lunch, and this line was it was raining. People were standing outside with umbrellas, wrapped in around 2 blocks. I could not believe my eyes that people would do that to taste a beer. But they do it. And that if you're going to, cognitive dissonance, if you are going to invest so much in something, it better be worth it. We psychologically psych ourselves in those ways. If I'm going to brew a beer, if I'm going to invest all the time in making a beer, and then, in the end, it takes me 2 weeks, 5 hours, and then 2 weeks of waiting before it's even ready to sample. You better believe that a part of me is going to be looking at this going, it better be good. It better be worth it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like that influences the way we perceive things, and that's going to influence the way that we evaluate as well.
And I love that you brought that up too, about the time that it takes to brew beer, because you said something earlier. You talked about humility and coming to this with humility. So I feel like there's two sides to this, really, right? And so there's the person who brewed the beer that's wanting to share their creation, right? That wants to share it and wants people to like it, but also wants to receive feedback about it and say, okay, if you don't like this, what can I do to make it better? But then there's the flip side on the judging side. So let's think about it, from a competition perspective, you don't know who brewed this beer. You don't know anything about the beer. All you're given is the style, or if it's a specialty category, whatever special ingredients it has in it. So, you don't know anything about it. So you're just comparing that beer against other things. So you're trying to be objective and write down, but here's my point, and here's what I wanted to talk to you about this. Remember that there's a real person on the other side that's reading those comments. Okay. Like I'm going to tell a story real quick, cause this one's close to my heart. The first beer I ever entered in competition, this was as a young brewer. This was probably like my 7th, 8th batch or something like that. So I thought it was great. I loved it. I sent it into a competition and I was really excited to get the results back. The results come back and overall impression was one word: bland. And I was sitting there going, I was like, I just remember that feeling sitting there reading this. The beer didn't have to be great. Okay. It didn't have to score a 40 or a 45, right, or be the best beer that anybody had ever tasted. Hell, at that point, it didn't even have to be, sort of a middling range, drinkable, sure. But geez, guys, or girls, or whoever this judge was. Actually, I know who the judge was, because your name is on the judging
I know,
sheet.
usually with an email address.
Yeah, with an email address. But that to me, it shows a problem with evaluation and judging. Okay.
Well, yeah. I agree with you. And I feel like, and the truth is, people might contend that I I just prefer bland beer because I'm big into the pale lager thing and whatnot. And, that's another thing that we didn't really hit on, but I think deserves mention is that if I spend most of my time inhaling hoppy IPA and I just have an opinion that blonde ale and pale lager and whatnot is just bland and boring, you're not going to convince me that even if you suspend your preferences or attempt to, that's not in some way going to influence the way you're evaluating a beer. And that's really the point in this segment that I wanted to make, is that we are influenced. The way we evaluate beers is going to be influenced from the outside, external factors, preferences, expectations, all of that stuff. And that is perfectly okay. It doesn't mean that there's no value in evaluating and judging beer. My point is that when we're aware, when we have that level of awareness that, my evaluation, as unbiased as I think it is still going to be influenced by these things, and that's fine, then we can kind of view evaluation differently as this thing that's not as objective as some people really seem to want to make it out to be. You're not going to convince me that evaluation is ever very objective. You're not. Doesn't matter though, because we all have our different opinions, and that's okay. Here's the deal. We got to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be discussing our thoughts on things like formalized training in evaluation and judging, as well as how all of this stuff relates to what we do here at Brewlosophy, and I think that's going to get into some interesting stuff. Stick around.
The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you, and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com.
Just as the Grainfather all-in-one brewing system revolutionized all-grain brewing at home, the Grainfather conical fermenter and glycol chiller take this one step further by giving homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation, just like commercial breweries use. With a full array of features including insulated double-walled construction, an innovative dual-valve yeast dump and sampling tap, and an integrated heating element and temperature controller, the conical fermenter provides a professional quality fermenting environment for superior temperature control. With the ability to individually power and control the temperature of up to 4 Grainfather conical fermenters, each with their own fermenting schedule, the Grainfather Glycol Chiller is the perfect addition to ensure superior fermenting results. And for a limited time, you can save 10% on your order by going to grainfather.com and entering coupon code NZB during checkout. Once again, enter coupon code NZB when you order the Grainfather conical fermenter or glycol chiller at grainfather.com. Once again, that's grainfather.com.
After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com.
I've never really been a very competitive person. I far prefer collaboration with others over trying to beat them at something. And so I hadn't really considered getting involved in any sort of formalized beer evaluation up until about 2015, when a group of my local brewing buddies all decided to become BJCP judges and were kind of encouraging me to do so with them. I ended up passing the online test. I kind of went into this thing. I'm not trying to humble brag here, but I went into this thing not really caring if I did well, because it wasn't something I was impassioned about. But I passed the test without studying or anything online. And then I went into the, didn't do any tasting stuff, but I'd been drinking and evaluating beer for 15 years at this time. Ended up doing fairly well on the tasting exam. And today I am a certified BJCP judge, though I'm not really sure how long that's going to remain active, seeing as I haven't judged a competition in like 2 or 3 years. Cade, what are your evaluation credentials?
So I've obviously been drinking beer for a while. I'm 32, so I guess legally I've been drinking beer for 11 years. Although, honestly, it wasn't too many years before 21 that I started drinking. I wasn't one of those kids that was drinking in college or middle school or any of that, or in high school or middle school. I definitely drank in college. But yeah, I've been drinking for a long time, but I'm also like you, Marshall. I'm a certified BJCP judge. I do judge as regularly as I can, although there aren't really that many competitions that are local or easy to get to. I generally have to drive to judge, but I do try to judge a lot. Eventually, at some point, I would like to become a national BJCP judge, reach that level. And then also, I'm a certified Cicerone. So I've taken the BJCP online exam. I've taken the BJCP tasting exam. I've done the certified beer server, which is the level 1 Cicerone. That's the online Cicerone exam. And then I've done the actual written and tasting Cicerone exam. In the midst of, off-flavor tastings, like I said, I've probably done half a dozen of those. And like you, Marshall, I'm sure I've read books and books on brewing. So all of that sounds like I should have a lot of expertise on tasting. But understanding, I mean, tasting is still just such a nuanced thing for me. I feel like I'm constantly learning all the time. I'm not one of those people that's going to say, oh yeah, this is exactly what this, compound is. This is DMS and it's absolutely DMS. And if you can't taste it, whatever. But I did a lot to train, but also looking back, I still don't know what I don't know, and I'm still learning a lot. And I think that continues for other people too. Even people who've been drinking beer for 30 or 40 years, you still don't know everything.
That's that level of humility that I was talking about, that I think you have that, and that's good, because you can approach these things. I'll never forget. I had one kind of older judge. This wasn't even local. We were at an event a couple years ago, and the judge was telling me, we're just kind of shooting the shit over a beer, and we're talking about evaluation and how to basically our conversation, which I guess we can get into if we want to, is just how terrible some judges are in their feedback on the judging form. And the comment that was given to me that just made me kind of cringe a little bit was, if you taste DMS, then if what you think is DMS, then write down that you taste DMS. I don't trust that. Yeah, exactly. And I've heard from other judges who I'm going to say that I trust these other ones a bit more, that you're better off describing what it is that you're tasting. Maybe you think DMS is corny, rather than saying, oh, DMS, you screwed up. You explain, I'm getting a slight corn character in the, finish of the beer on the flavor, blah, blah, blah. You do that kind of thing. And that way, you're not necessarily going to the step of saying, no, this is an actual off flavor. You're just describing what it is that you're tasting. One of and this kind of goes into that. One of the issues that I have with, like when I became a BJCP judge, there was this, I think, perspective shift that others took. And I think a lot of judges really enjoy this feeling of looking the expert, looking like they know more what they're doing. And there's this presumption that like judges, and I think even probably Cicerones, that having that certification somehow indicates that you are better at tasting and thus evaluating beer than people who don't have that certification. And I can't say it emphatically enough. I just think that's so wrong.
Oh, yeah. No, I absolutely think that is so wrong. There's no way. I am not a good taster, or what I would consider a good taster. I take that back. I'm a good taster. I'm not a great or excellent taster by any means. And I have a BJCP and a certified Cicerone certification, and I did well on the tasting portions of both those exams. But all that says about me is that I'm able to communicate what I think I can taste. And so that's where I think, and again, I don't think that this like elevates me or puts me on a pedestal or anything, but I think we need to, as judges and as beer evaluators, really work on our ability to communicate what we're tasting. Like, that's a great example. You said DMS and you write down DMS in the score sheet. Okay. I'm fairly confident that I know what DMS tastes like. I've tasted it a bunch of times. It's something I can pick up in the wild, I guess, without using flavor spikes. Picked it up a couple of times, or at least what I think is DMS. I still don't on a judging sheet write DMS.
Yeah.
This is what you need to do to fix it. I will usually write, I taste a cooked tomato, or tomato paste, or a vegetal kind of flavor. And then I'll put in parentheses DMS ? And a close parentheses. I'm never going to say that I absolutely 100% tasted this.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I will do my best. If I honestly believe that, based on my subjective perception of a beer that I'm evaluating and providing feedback for, if I truly believe that I'm picking up one of these off flavors, even then, I'm not just going to say this is in there. Oh yeah, acetaldehyde. My Paul, our Hop Chronicles brewer, local buddy of mine who brews for the Hop Chronicles. He was telling me that he was collecting data. This is a couple months ago on a Hop Chronicles beer. I forget what hop it was, and he's just at a local pub, having a few drinks, and then people would come in, and before they started drinking, he'd get them to sample and evaluate this single hop beer. Some guy comes in. Apparently, he's like brews at a small brewery in Sacramento or something like that. And this guy comes in, just smells this Hop Chronicles single hop, very simple, 90% Pilsner malt, 10% Vienna malt beer, and says, "Oh, diacetyl, I can't even drink this."
Oh my gosh.
The guy's not certified or anything. I'm a BJCP judge who tries every single one of Paul's beer. And I promise you, I would be willing to bet cash money that there was no diacetyl in this beer. Nobody else noted it, but it's that mentality. Like, that's the cool thing, to be the guy who points that out. We've all witnessed that. I mean, I guarantee you've seen it as well, right, Cade? Somebody who immediately does that thing.
Yes, of course. I mean, anybody that's judged for any significant period of time is going to have seen that, and sometimes that person's right, or at least right by consensus. Sometimes it is actually diacetyl in there, and sometimes it's not. Very often it's not, or at least I'm not perceiving it whenever I taste it. Yeah. So one of the things, this is sort of interesting for me, one of the things that I started doing at competitions when I thought I tasted an off flavor is bug the people around me. Now, that's probably bad judging etiquette. Okay, you're not supposed to interrupt or do things, but make sure they're done tasting their beer or done, or especially if there's just judges sort of meandering around that aren't actually tasting beer. But I'd hand them the sample that's in my glass and say, "Taste this. What do you think?" And if they said, tastes fine, I would say, well, I get something like what I would perceive as DMS. What do you get? And then they go and, give it a sniff, taste it a little bit and either say, actually, yeah, now that you point that out, I do taste some of that. Or they would say, no, I just taste, this other thing. I taste, here's a great one, Skunky versus Continental Pilsner malt. Continental Pilsner malt has sulfur. And it produces sulfur. So sometimes, and some versions of Pilsner have sulfur in it. That's not necessarily an off flavor in a Pils, but Skunky is an off flavor. Yeah. So how much is acceptable? And that's what I started to do, is just sort of ask around and see if there's a consensus. I don't want just one person to be the only one that tastes, the off flavor.
That brings me to another issue with, I think there's an element of authority that goes along with somebody who has, I was in New Zealand with Grandmaster BJCP Judge Gordon Strong, and I had to evaluate beers next to him. There's no way I can strip myself of not wanting to be the first one to say something, right? Like, I'm just going to follow along whatever Gordon says because obviously he's going to be right. That though, I believe, is another thing that gets in the way of an actual, quote unquote unbiased evaluation from somebody. I was drinking a blonde ale with a national ranked BJCP judge at one point, and as well as some other people, and it was a perfectly fine normal blonde ale. And this judge says, "I DMS." How many people at that point do you think were like, "Oh yeah, that's DMS," right? Because they said it, and you made the comment once they pointed it out. I'm not convinced that this whole thing, and a lot of people look forward to it. Like, you go and you're looking for a consensus. You're looking for other people to agree with you because we don't want to be the only one who doesn't, agree with the crowd. But sometimes I feel like that, again, is getting in the way of an actual, real, unbiased evaluation. I've messed around with Jersey and Tim before. I served them a beer, and just for fun, I believe it was a Pilsner. I mean, like a straight up normal out of the can simple Pilsner. And I told them that I made it with a hop that makes it taste like orange juice. You want to guess what they started smelling after that? Exactly.
Orange juice.
When you are deferring to authority, when you are relying on what somebody else says that you trust is better than you, for lack of a better term, you're going to be influenced by that. And I feel like there's an element of drinking with or evaluating beers with people who have these certifications that can kind of influence us in that way. Now, there's also, and I've talked to people who want to be national ranked, or they want to increase their rank level with BJCP purely for the bragging rights. And by all means, do it. I think that's awesome. My perspective on I don't really take much pride in being a certified BJCP judge, only because, again, I'm not very competitive, so I can't really tap into what it is that motivates people to want to compete and to want to judge and do all that kind of stuff anyways. But I do look at the kind of the entirety of competitions and judging as being something that people should do for fun, more so than proof of their brewing worth, if you will.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for me, it's about evaluating the next beer up. For me, it's about, okay, I would like to understand these issues. I'm a home brewer still, even though I work at a brewery, I still homebrew. So I want to know what these issues are when they come up for me.
Yeah.
And now that I know, or at least have a good familiarity with diacetyl, DMS, and some of those other things, I have, like I said, I've encountered them, or at least what I perceive in the wild. And I'm not, this might sound a little hoity. I'm going to try not to, but having the certification, right? Having a BJCP certification and a certified Cicerone certification, I have a level of confidence with those off flavors that I think that other people, or that many other people, don't necessarily have, right? That does two things. So for me as the person who is the certified Cicerone, giving an opinion, one of the things I'm always conscious about is my opinion isn't gospel. It's not necessarily the truth. It's just what I taste. And I could be wrong. In fact, I have been wrong before on multiple occasions. I've given something to somebody and said, "Hey, I taste DMS in this. What do you taste?" And they said, No. I just taste like this, pale ale malt. That's what tastes corny. And so I'm always looking at it from that perspective. But at the same time, I know by having done a bunch of training that I'm very sensitive to diacetyl, and I'm more sensitive than a lot of people that I come into contact with, and probably more sensitive than I need to be for a good beer, right? So a lot of English styles have a little bit of diacetyl in them, and that's okay. Or a lot of, or like a Czech Pils. I can taste the diacetyl in a Czech Pils sometimes when some people don't, and that's not a bad thing, and it doesn't hurt the beer for me. But my point is, on this, if you are experienced and if you do have trainings and stuff, or even if you're not, you're entitled to your opinion.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to share your opinion. If you're communicating with somebody who's a Cicerone, and you taste something, don't be afraid to share that. But at the same time, if you are experienced, you don't think that your opinion is gospel.
Right.
Everything's different for everybody. And just because you taste something doesn't mean it's absolutely there.
Amen, brother. And I'll be honest. I mean, I maybe question. I'm a questioner at heart. I'm kind of cynical, whatever. I call myself an optimistic cynic. there are people out there that I absolutely do trust have just master palates. Gordon Strong's one of them. Master Cicerone Nicole Ernie. Like I would trust her to evaluate my beer very well. Not to say that she would think my beer's well, but her evaluation skills are probably tip top. I'd like to end this section on something very interesting, an experience that I had. So a few years ago, it was actually 2015. Yeah, I entered 4 beers in the biggest homebrewing competition that there is into 4 different categories. It was the same exact beer into 4 of them. So it was intended to be a Vienna lager. I entered it as a Märzen, I think like a Czech amber lager, some other things. But the 2 that I'm going to focus on here because I thought it was so interesting are the Vienna lager score sheet and the Märzen score sheet, in part because they were on the same flight. So the judging pair judged my Vienna lager next to my Märzen.
All right.
So I get my score sheets back. I've actually got them sitting in front of me right now because I dug them out. I scored a combined 42 on the Vienna lager. The comments were that the beer was clean, tasted toasty, had no off flavors, and was a good example of the style. It ended up taking 3rd place. Cool. Great. Wonderful. Märzen, which got tasted 2 later, I believe. It was either 2 before or 2 later in the flight. A collective 26.5. And here's the comments on this one. One judge, a certified beer judge, by the way, who's also happens to be a professional brewer, says, unfortunately, there is a considerable diacetyl problem. The other judge doesn't note diacetyl. Again, same judging pair who judged my Vienna. Doesn't note diacetyl, though. Says that oxidation ruined the profile. I find that fascinating because these beers were literally bottled at the same time, one after the other, brand new bottles. I went through my normal sanitation process. Vienna Lager gets a 42. Märzen gets a 26.5. I don't know how to reconcile that. And it just again, this inconsistency, it's a very interesting thing for me to think about because I do feel like there's when you're when you're evaluating a beer and you're sitting at a judging table, not everything can be good, not everything can be bad. And I can't help but wonder what influence, having to kind of rank these things next to each other has, because these were identical beers. I promise you.
That's funny. That's funny. One of the things I would say, and this would probably piss you off a little bit, Marshall, we'll see,
No.
but is you weren't there tasting the beer, right? So there could have been something in the bottle. We can never say that it wasn't, but at the same time, like I totally hear you. I understand, right? Yeah.
I think that people, after hearing that, would be wont to believe that perhaps something there, rather than accusing the judges of just not being that good, which, to put it bluntly, I guess that's what it sounds like I'm doing. I don't mean it to be mean. They're going to say, well, there probably was, benefit of the doubt. There was probably something wrong with the bottle. When I used to judge, I would go and I'd bottle like 10 of each one and I'd only submit the 2 that needed to be submitted or whatever. And I'd save those other ones to sample at the time of judging, because they always tell you when the beers are going to be judged. And then once you get your score sheets back. So I had old versions of all of these. It seems very unlikely to me that the only bottle that went bad was the Märzen, and
the one bottle that they tasted on that day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just seems so unlikely. And again, this is one judging pair. It's not like everybody was doing that, but I think again, it goes to show that there's a possibility that some other stuff is at play during the evaluation process. Again, if you love competing, if you love judging, I am not trying to talk anyone out of doing that. I actually think there's a lot of value in it just for the fun aspect of it alone. And again, more power to you if you love doing that stuff. Now, one of the things that we've talked a bit about over here at Brewlosophy. I mean, we are in the business of beer evaluation, not necessarily in the way that we've been talking about it thus far, but we serve our beer to people and we have them evaluate it. One of the things that we put an article out a while ago, one of the most common arguments that we get about the triangle test is, well, if your tasters were only more trained, then they'd probably be able to distinguish the beers in your triangle tests better. And that, because they're not trained, it invalidates your results.
This one's fun too, because sort of internally, there's a couple of us internally that have been talking about back and forth whether we should train tasters or not, or whether that's even useful. I think this one's fascinating too, because when I see that comment, I'm always like, well, okay, but I'm serving it at homebrew meetings. So I'm serving it to people who are BJCP judges and who aren't, who are just regular beer drinkers. And then even like people who just came, they don't even really drink beer all that much, but they're just there with somebody. They're a friend of a friend and they're trying the beers. I've never noticed, at least in I guess in my experience with Brewlosophy and in doing the limited experience that I have, I've never noticed like a specific person or people being able to pick up things consistently than other people aren't able to, at least for the variables that we're testing, right?
Yes. And we've actually tested that out. We had, in the beginning, I think we had 34, 35 experiments under our belt. And this was we call it the shitty palates argument. It was such a common complaint. Well, obviously they're not going to get it because they're not well trained. If you'd served the beer to me, I would have tasted it different. How freaking pretentious, right? So we actually did. We compared, we collected all of our data, and then we separated people by tasting experience. So whether they were a judge, if they were a home brewer, if they were just your standard Coors Light drinker, absolutely no difference. In fact, not statistically significant. We had our statistician friend, Justin Angavera, help us out on this. So there was no statistically significant differences in ability to distinguish in the triangle test between all of these different people that we were separating out. Interestingly, though, the very few that there were, Coors Light drinkers actually performed slightly better, not to a statistically significant degree, but performed slightly better than our certified and higher ranked BJCP judges. Figure that one out, And what I tell people is our tasters are you. You are the type of person that we would have do this triangle test. And I get it. I get that when you're sitting back and you're looking at reading a result, it's really easy to, Monday morning quarterback, right? Well, if you'd only done this, or if you had more, try it out for yourself. It's not that hard. Give it a shot. You will see. And the other argument that I can't stand, well, triangle tests are just hard. Yeah, but they're good. They work. They help us to distinguish. They point out whether something creates a distinguishable difference or not. That's why it's used in the industry. What's really hard is telling apart two beers that taste identical. That's what's hard.
Yeah, that's totally. I'm glad you brought that up too about the triangle test itself. Because we always get so much feedback about that. The triangle test is a valid evaluation technique for determining whether two beers are different. And again, that's the point of the triangle test here. If we haven't said it enough, if we haven't beaten that dead horse to death, all we're trying to do is show whether or not you can tell those two beers apart.
That's it.
We're not actually trying to evaluate what makes them different. Now, we'll talk about it a little bit in our write-ups, but we're never going to be able to provide any objective data on that using the triangle test. And that's not the point of it. But yeah.
Exactly. And I can always tell the people out there who I'm assuming walk with their nose a little bit higher in the air. They're very pedantic. They like to be very verbose and have an interestingly large vocabulary. But what they're actually saying is so empty and shallow. And usually the argument is, or the contention is that we are, Brewlosophy is out there using non-trained, poor beer evaluators to tell people how to make their beer better. Unless we've slipped up, I can't recall ever typing out, ever editing, ever seeing anything to tell somebody how to do things better. We tell people this created a distinguishable difference or not. This is what I thought about it. If somebody wants to go and brew short and shoddy for the rest of their brewing careers, no skin off my back. I don't care. You can do that. And if the beer's good, it's good. If you like it, you like it. One of the things that I've thought was really interesting, I wonder if you've noticed this, Cade, because you haven't been doing experiments as long as I have. I'll serve people 3 beers for the triangle test. When you do that, people get very, very focused. And I think a lot of people kind of enjoy doing the triangle test. It's kind of fun, right? But you dig in to these 3 beers, 2 of them being exactly the same, 1 being the different one, and you're so intent on it. A good portion of the time, I would say probably over half the time, people will leave the samples in those cups. You can combine them all. You want to finish them? Oh no, I wasn't really a huge fan of that beer. Cool. In the beginning, I just thought, yeah, no big deal. It's a very simple beer. Try to accentuate the variable being tested. But then the interesting observation that I made was 20, 30 minutes later, I'll just go back and pour them a pint of that very same beer without them knowing. And they drink it. And sometimes they'll be like, God, this is great. Tell me about this beer. Without knowing that was the experiment beer. There is something about the deep evaluation process. And I feel like this is so linked to Brewlosophy because we are forcing people to focus so intently on differences and on this evaluation thing. There's something about digging in so deeply that I really think impacts or influences the way we not just perceive, but almost enjoy a beer, mead, or cider.
Yeah. So, oh man, I'm glad you brought this up because I actually wasn't intending to talk about this, but it's perfect for this. I generally find that I don't like beers as much if I over evaluate them.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is, but I generally not necessarily evaluate every beer that I taste, but if it's the first time that I've ever had the beer, I'd usually run it through a little bit of process to see like, okay, what's kind of, what does it taste like in the malt? What does it taste like in the hop? What does it taste like in the yeast? All that kind of stuff. Just kind of run it through my normal process, just kind of as a handshake, like saying hi to this beer, like, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. But if it's a beer that I've had before, I'll just crush it. And one of the things I've noticed is the beers that I just grab out of the refrigerator and drink just to drink and not evaluate them, that I end up liking them better.
Yep.
So I wonder if there's something behind that. Now, that's not to say that I don't like beers that I evaluate. That's not the case at all. Some of the beers that I've judged have blown my mind.
Totally.
I've had beers out there that I just thought, oh my God, this is, if not the best example, this is one of the best examples of this whatever style that I've had before.
Yeah.
But that's really fascinating because I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that I think about a lot. Over analyzing the beer, you start to pick out flaws that may not necessarily be flaws.
Yeah.
Like, so what if a Continental Pilsner, or if a Pils has Continental Pils sulfur in it, right? So what? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's okay for the style.
Yeah.
So if I pick up sulfur in it, that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah.
I don't really, that's another thing too we didn't really talk about, and that's fine, is blind spots in tasting. I'm not good at picking up sulfur. I don't know what it is. It's one that most people that I talk to are able to get, even like a whiff of skunkiness or sulfur. It turns them off. Me, I don't know. I guess I just crushed too much Heineken whenever I was younger, or Corona or something. But yeah, man, I'll chug that stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, real quick, real funny story about that. So on my BJCP exam, one of the beers was Heineken that had been sitting out on somebody's patio for like 2 weeks. Okay. So it was a skunk bomb. And I scored it a 42 and said it was a great example of an international pale lager.
Perfect example.
So perfect example.
I love it, dude. Have you had that experience when you're doing triangle tests where people they don't want to finish the beer? Not that they hate it, but it's almost like I got to know you a little too well.
Oh yeah,
you get too close to it.
Yeah, I've totally had people do that before too, and I always thought exactly what you said was just like, oh okay, I guess they just didn't like that beer or whatever. Yeah. Again, no skin off my back. You don't have to like the beer. Right, it's okay.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, some people do that. Also, I've had the opposite too, Marshall, where some people will they will combine them all together and they just say, yeah, whatever, I couldn't taste the difference. I'm just combine them all together and walk away.
Yeah, those are usually the alkies of the group. they just pound it. They crush whatever's left over. All right. Well, we can't have a conversation about beer evaluation without at least hitting a little bit on the 1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. This actually came up last week. Somebody emailed me because I don't hide my my ideas and about beer evaluation and whatnot. And if I respond on Facebook or Reddit or something like that, I'll be honest about my perspectives on it. Somebody said, well, that's funny coming from you when you've got a 1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim as a regular part of your podcast, the entire motivation behind that was kind of to hold a mirror up to that world. It's what I find so hilarious about it, and I still love it. To me, that one little, usually 1.5 to 2 minute beer review that those guys do is sort of like Family Guy. It's kind of showing how goofy this whole process is. When Jersey goes and he makes his funny voice about esters and phenols, I mean, that is what we sound like. That's what we look like when we're doing it. Again, not to criticize it. I think that there's value in it. I think it's great, but to just recognize that it doesn't have to be this hoity-toity thing, and that we can have a little bit of fun with it.
Oh man, I couldn't agree more. I actually I'm one of those guys. I'm always going to defend Jersey and Tim and having that segment on the Brewlosophy podcast because I love it. And I started listening. That was before, I think you started that segment before I was involved with Brewlosophy. Yeah. So I got to actually consume it as a somebody on the other side. That Jersey and Tim, I remember like one of the first couple of reviews and just like laughing my butt off in the car or like chuckling, and I was just going, this is awesome. Like this is perfect, because I can say whatever I want to say. I can say, oh, I'm a certified Cicerone and I taste DMS in this beer and it has this and it's not a good example of this style because the IBUs are too low or whatever. I can do all that bullshit. I can do that. I can physically regurgitate that stuff. But at the end of the day, is it a good beer or is it not?
Yeah.
Right? Is it something that I would drink? Does it taste good? And what do I like about it?
Yeah. And what cracks me up is that in this process of having fun with beer evaluation, the guys, Jersey and Tim, have 100% gotten better, unarguably have gotten better at beer evaluation. Just yesterday, we're in my garage. I've got an IPA on tap right now, a very interesting one that I'm sure we'll talk about in a future episode. Tim is out there. Mr. Juniper doesn't want to drink anything hoppy. And he says, hey, dude, pour me a pint of that IPA. I hate admitting it, but I actually kind of like it. And he takes it and he starts rambling off stuff about it. I'm just like, look at this guy. And you know what? He never went to a class. What he did, he just experienced it. He had fun with it. He took it lightheartedly, and he's starting to enjoy that aspect of it. And that's the value that I see in beer evaluation. Am I going to trust Tim more than I'm going to trust Gordon Strong? Of course not. It doesn't mean that I don't trust his opinion and that I don't find value in the way he evaluates it. And yeah, we have a little bit of fun with it, but I'll tell you, the Kolsch on this episode that they reviewed, I'm smoky. Had a phenolic thing. I couldn't agree more with the guys. So there's a part of it that, and you know what amazes me is these people out there who criticize the show because we have Jersey and Tim. If you're one of those people, we're probably not going to have fun hanging out together, because those are the kind of people that I want to hang out with. I want to have a good time with beer and brewing. And to me, that little clip and those guys are a perfect example of what I think we could open ourselves up to be more inclusive as a hobby.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. I love American light lagers. I'll drink them all. I'll drink Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light. I don't care. I'll say it. I'm here. I love drinking those beers. Okay. I'm a certified Cicerone. I get it.
Yep.
But the way to bring it back like full circle to the top, because while you were talking about that, I was thinking we're all tasters.
Yep.
Right. Every human is a taster. So you can taste beer, and if the beer tastes if it tastes good to you, that's great. The training allows me to be able to pinpoint certain things, or maybe describe it in a different way, or using more commonly accepted terms, maybe even as a better way to say it.
Yeah.
But everybody's a taster. Everybody should be able to taste the stuff. They may not know how to describe it or what to say or what to call it, but you can taste it, and if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't.
Yeah. Amen. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, Cade, I have no doubt that you and I could stretch this conversation out forever. I know that we've been talking about it on our own for years. It's something that has been on our mind. And I hope that our listeners out there at least got some idea, some perspective on what we think about beer evaluation and judging. Perhaps we'll dig into it again on some other course in the future. Any parting words for our listeners, Cade?
The good thing about evaluating and judging beer is you get to drink beer. So continue doing that. Drink beer, and I guarantee you'll start improving your chops if you want to, or not. Just drink beer and have fun.
I will drink some beer today for sure. All right, don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read about all of the experimental stuff we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go